Good morning. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Nancy and Ilaria and Stefania, and thank you to the City of Florence for having us today. I really have appreciated the opportunity to come and speak with you, and it's a great honor for me to be here. Again, my name is Robert Stein. I am the Deputy Director of the Dallas Museum of Art, where I've been for about 2 years. And I wanted to come and talk to you a little bit this morning about ways that we are thinking about the interface between cultural heritage, the use of technology, and the ways in which museums can be more effective in leveraging that for our publics. So we're talking today about smart cities and the way in which the world is really changing and growing in some really stunning ways. The Guardian has a project called Guardian Cities, in which they reported recently, January of 2014, that by 2050, 70% of the global population will live in cities. This is a picture of my city. This is Dallas. Dallas, Texas is in the southern part of the United States. We are a city of about 7 million people and the fastest growing metroplex in the United States this year. In order to reach 70% of the global population in 2050, The Guardian tells us that we would need to build a city of over 1 million people every 5 days from today till 2050. So that's a really remarkable statistic, and can tell you a little bit about how quickly populations are migrating into urban areas. And this is bringing a lot of really interesting consequences. So, of course, we're talking about how cities get smart. And I thought it would be really useful for us to think about the factors that are driving that. One is, of course, population change, but what is it that is causing an interest in smart cities, and what is the role that cultural heritage can really play in advocating for that? Of course, technology is changing our cities all around us. We see that. I think many of us are on our Wi-Fi connections right now, and I feel my phone in my pocket buzzing as people are using Twitter and various things to talk about this conference. But technology is also changing culture. It's changing the way we experience culture. It's changing our patterns of visiting and appreciating it, and it's changing the way in which we interact and interface with each other. Technology is, of course, accelerating the pace of discovery. We have the ability to know things and to know them in ways that we have not been able to do before. The flow of information is very fluid today, and I think, you know, we sit around at dinner and we have an interesting conversation. If we have a question, the very first thing we do is search Google or some other place to get an answer. So technology is certainly accelerating that. This is an image of the United States Patent Office in 1930. But if you think about the proliferation of patent and invention between 1930 and today, it's really obvious that the advent of especially digital technologies have accelerated our ability to innovate. I think a lot of what is driving a move towards smarter cities is the promise that sensors of various shapes and sizes can tell us new things about the way we are connected to each other and to cities. And so sensors are becoming ever smaller and more embedded and more often wearable. So this is actually an image of a LilyPad Arduino, which is a computer, a small embedded computer that my son and I are in fact using to build watches that can track our GPS location. And so this is now to the point that even children can embed their own sensors and wear them and carry them around with each other. But what does this actually do for us? And what does this mean for the ways that cities are evolving? I think we can see a lot of promise in what smart cities will hold for us, especially as more and more of us are inhabiting them and living them. I know in Dallas, we use sensors in a variety of different ways to manage our water usage, to meter our traffic flow. In this image, I was very interested, and maybe you will be too, by the circled tab here, which is wine quality enhancing. So apparently sensors can help us make our city's wine better, although it's been pretty good here in Florence. What's concerning, though, is this is, of course, being driven by companies who are selling and making sensors. So this is a graph by a company, Cisco, which many of you are familiar with. So, I mean, in some ways, this is good in that the company has an incentive to do this, but, you know, I'm not exactly sure what digital swarming and hub pavilions are, or why I would want them in my city. I'm not exactly certain that by advocating or by abdicating our responsibility for designing the city to whatever company may produce for us is necessarily the way that we will want to see our cities grow and develop. In fact, I want to propose to you today that smart cities have a problem, and that unless we are prepared to advocate on behalf of cultural heritage, that you may in fact see smart cities becoming something that we may not appreciate very much. So what's clear is that information is certainly proliferating faster than we've ever seen it proliferate before. We're swimming in the sea of data and content produced through the web and through sensors, but humans are not necessarily any better equipped to deal or process that information than we ever have been in the past. So consequently, the real trouble is one of making sense of the data that's coming into us. How should we use it? How can it be governed and kept and maintained? Despite our perceived innovation, studies, this is an article cited from The Economist, tell us that actually gross productivity is falling. If you look at the GDP per person today versus in 1970, it's fallen every year since 1970. So we are in fact innovating more. We're coming up with more ideas, or at least we're recording more patents. But we are less productive than we have been in the last 3 decades. So what's that all about? What's going on here? I think each one of us is crucially aware of how technology is accelerating the pace of life. I remember having my first email account and how it had such great promise for me that it was easy to talk to my friends across the country, and I don't have very good handwriting, and so it was really appealing to be able to send notes and letters. And now I think many of us spend our waking moments figuring out how to get rid of our email. Adam Greenfeld authored an article called The Dark Side of the Smart City, where he talks about some of the social implications that are happening as a result of both the globalization of cities and their evolution as technical oases. And he sort of points out that one of the wonderful things about cities is how a diverse culture is living what he says cheek and jowl, or very closely to each other, and they develop both savoir-faire and the diversity that allows us to know how to coexist. And what his assertion is here is that technology, or the proliferation of smart cities, is actually insulating us from each other and allowing us to create a very individualized experience with a city that he would say is not a positive result. So why is this a place that I want to live, and why should we be excited about smart cities? And what if this is the direction, if we're all bound to live in a city by 2015, what should we as cultural heritage professionals do about it? what exactly is it that makes a city smart? I would say that it's not that we have a lot of information at our disposal. So cities definitely need smart people, but more so cities need creative people. A survey in 2010 by IBM of more than 1,500 CEOs cited that their most urgent critical need was for employees with creative skills, creative background, and a proof that they can actually put information to use in new ways, solving new problems. Gerhard Lenhardt writes about the future of knowledge, and from this the title of my talk comes from, but he says that the future of knowledge is to let, quote, the machines do the heavy lifting, and for us humans to focus on connecting the dots, discovering the context, meaning, and relevance of it to make human sense of it all. So not simply to gather information, but to tell us what it means. He goes on to say that right brain thinking becomes extremely valuable once again as empathy, improvisation, and interdependent thinking become a new standard. Knowledge becomes not an asset for control or dominance, but for contribution and co-creation. And in fact, I think there's no better city in the world than Florence that can demonstrate for us what the influence of culture and creation, indeed co-creation, has on the result of a city over hundreds of years, but that is not necessarily the direction that our contemporary cities are turning. So I would assert that culture is in fact the missing ingredient, and we see that we have some good historical fact for this. This is an image of Max Planck, a great physicist and innovator in his own right, who was also known to write, compose, and act in operas. In fact, a study by Michel and Robert Root Bernstein, which is published in Psychology Today, tells us that almost all Nobel laureates in the sciences actively engage in arts as adults. They are 25 times more likely than the average scientist to sing, dance, act, 17 times more likely to be a visual artist, 12 times more likely to write poetry and literature, 8 times more likely to do woodworking or some other craft, and 4 times as likely to be a musician or a photographer. And clicker, there we go. Of course, artists, many of us representing museum and the visual arts, but artists have always been students of technology. This, one of our favorite images, Sunday on La Grande Jatte from the Art Institute of Chicago and Georges Seurat, is a great example, but I wonder if many of you know that Seurat and the Neo-Impressionists were really influenced by 3 specific scientists: James Clerk Maxwell, who discovered, invented, and documented the equations that govern the laws of electromagnetics and optics. He also defined for the first time hue and culture, tint and saturation. Ogden Rood, who theorized that by placing many small colored dots together that they would fuse into different colors. Seurat quotes Rood in his letter saying that his technique in pointillist and neo-impressionist art was derived or inspired by Rood's scientific hypothesis. And Chevreul is a chemist who studied soaps and acids, but also dyes and pigments. So it's really easy to see how our retina displays and the 3 color LCDs that many of you have in your hands now are derived from similar techniques. Joseph-Marie Jacquard is a noted textilist and inventor, and on the right here is a machine that Jacquard invented, a loom that could create very intricate patterns. You may notice the paper hanging from the loom, which has an intricate series of punches or dots. You may also see this in player pianos. But those dots and punches are in fact the direct precursor to punch cards for computer programming. And the technique is exactly the same and inspired and derived from textile and industry. Artists, of course, are adapting. David Hockney is a great example. Hockney has always appropriated a current technology and reappropriated it in new ways. Here he is expressing his art on the iPad devices. But do you think that museums are really adapting? This looks like a very classic and very respectable gallery installation. In fact, it's from Chicago in 1913, after the Armory show left New York for Chicago. But it may as well be in any of our museums today. This is one of my favorite quotes about a museum. It's from an assistant secretary of the Smithsonian who says that the work of, he's talking about our museums in America, the work of museums has not kept pace with the times. The United States is far behind the spirit of its own people. This cannot long continue, and the museum of the past must be set aside, reconstructed, and transformed from a cemetery of bric-a-brac into a nursery of living thought. And this would be great, except it was given in a speech on the Museum of the Future by G. Brown Goode in 1891. So it seems that we have not adapted so very far, and what are we going to do about it? So smart cities, I would say, need smart museums. And in Dallas, we're trying to do a few things about that. Our museum is the largest museum in our region. We are about 110 years old. We are the city's art museum. We're supported, and our building is owned by the city of Dallas. Again, a city of 6 million people, but unlike Florence, not a tourist destination unless you're a fan of the Dallas Cowboys. So Dallas has between 6.5 and 7 million people, and the Dallas Museum of Art has had a 10-year average visitation of 500,000 individuals. I told you earlier that the city is growing faster than any other city in America, but that attendance of the museum has remained flat, which means that what we have here is 8% of the population is visiting, but in fact that's a declining 8%. It's a less by percentage than the population of Dallas would have been a decade ago. So does that tell me that in fact our museum is having less impact? What is the purpose of a visual art museum in a city like Dallas, if not to offer creativity and inspiration to the public? So we're doing a few things to change that. We're studying what it means to have engagement with art in the first place. And of course, between two people, engagement is very straightforward. Boy meets girl, boy loves girl, and they live happily ever after. This becomes slightly more complicated when you begin to welcome more relationships into your museum. You can still do a fairly good job of engaging them with your collections, but what happens when those collections and those publics become very, very large? When Florence has 12 million visitors, how do you do a good job of providing a connection to them that's interesting and useful? And in fact, how do you get better at it over time? So our approach is to not completely dismiss the sensors and technologies of the trend in smart cities, but to put them to use for good purposes. So we are doing a few different things. We're trying to get beyond the anecdotal evidence that we hear all the time. You stand in the galleries, and it's very easy for someone to tell a story to you about how connected they've been to the art in your museum or to the content that you're presenting to them, but anecdotes are not enough to be measured and can't be acted upon at scale. So the real trick is, how do you measure the things that you can't see? How do you measure inspiration? How do you measure a connection to a cultural past? How do you measure the relationships that form around works of art? And can data in some way help museums to be more agile and responsive to the needs of their community, and how do we get better over time? So we began by a few things that we needed to get off our plate in Dallas first. In the US, many museums will charge admission for the public to come in. And in Dallas, it's a city like many in which there's great wealth and great poverty. We found that we were not equally serving our publics by having a charge for admission. So we worked with our board and our patrons, and we were able to eliminate our admission charge. And that was the first step to ensuring that our broadest public could come and connect and appreciate works of art. Secondly, many museums in the United States, the very first question you're asked when you walk into the gate is, are you a member? Which is wonderful unless you were concerned that the museum was for the elite, and you all of a sudden feel as though you've entered a country club and that you don't belong. And so what we would like is to build relationships with our public in which they do feel that they belong, and they feel that they have as much ownership over the art and culture in the museum as the very elite of the city do as well. So we initiated a program called DMA Friends, which is free to anyone in the city to join. You do have to arrive at the museum to join. It's intended to be a digital guide, a menu of sorts that would allow you to explore a variety of things to do in the museum. There are a fleet of iPads and a digital background system that presents to you activities, choices, ideas for ways to connect, participate, and engage with the museum's content that may be new to you. We find studies have shown us that in art museums, people spend 30 seconds or less at individual works of art, and that they tend to wander the midline down a gallery. And we suppose that this is because they don't know what better to do with themselves. Many of our guests who may not be accustomed to visiting museums don't know the breadth of the offer that the museum could bring to them. So the DMA Friends program pitches that as a menu of experiences. We designed somehow clever names and activities for which, as you participate as a member, your participation is recorded digitally. You're given credit in the form of points for having participated with the museum, with the idea being that your membership is free, but as you engage or connect with us more thoroughly, we will in turn give you more benefits. So the benefits you may have paid for in the past, now you can pay for by engaging and connecting with us, participating. We've also implemented an SMS integration in this. So as you're around the museum in the galleries or in studio classes, you can simply text us what you're doing in a series of 3-letter codes. 3-letter codes are posted on the walls of the museum. And as you're wandering about and you've made it to a certain gallery, you can choose to text us a code and let us know that you've been there. Again, completely optional. We've been very sensitive about privacy concerns, and so each and every piece of information that we collect is given to us expressly by a friend each and every time, so we don't track anything automatically. We do care about a number of different metrics that we're trying to improve on. One are the number of repeat visits we get, so not 500,000 to 600,000 unique visits, but how many times does a visitor come back? It's relatively easy to get them to come to your museum once, and it's relatively more difficult to get them to come back. So generally someone will only come back if they valued the experience the first time. So what would happen if we could grow audiences where dozens, hundreds, or thousands of individuals are coming back dozens of times in a year? We think that that is a much more important result. We are working to diversify the participation both of our audiences and the ways in which they connect to the museum. We have an encyclopedic collection in Dallas. Many of those collections or objects are unfamiliar to our public. We have deep holdings in Indonesian art and African art, as well as European and American art, which may be more familiar. So the diversity of participation in the museum is important to us. We think that if we're doing a good job connecting with our publics, that we ought to be able to see evidence of increased affinity, either for the museum itself or for art and visual culture over time, but only if we can uniquely identify a person, not abstractly a clicker through a door. And lastly, we ought to be able to motivate action on behalf of an audience. We ought to be able to make a call and see a response, and to have that sort of long-term connection and engagement to an audience over time. We realized in planning this that there are no longitudinal studies of visitor behavior in art museums that we are aware of. The studies that we are aware of span maybe a year or 18 months at best. And yet we hear stories all the time about guests or visitors who have, quote, grown up in the museum and have been coming over 20 years, but we have no evidence of it other than the story. So we launched about a year ago. We had 650 people join on our first day. And as of last week, inside of a year, we've had over 51,000 people from Dallas join. So this is a fairly remarkable achievement for us. So prior to this, over 100 years of the museum's history, we had 22,000 members. And in just over 1 year of the DMA Friends program, we've added an additional 50,000. I'm showing you graphs and charts here, which are the data analytics on the back end. So we're accumulating nearly 2 million rows of data from the audience of 50,000 people connected to the kinds of activities and behaviors that they're participating in with the museum. This is just a chart that shows our growth in the membership from January of 13 through last week. And the black line here shows a 12-week rolling average. So one of the things that's important is our staff is using these analytics to refine its approach and relationship to the public. You may notice in the springtime here, the black lines start to trend up. And that was the point in which our front of house staff began to understand the best way to explain the program to the public and to tell them why it was interesting and why they may appreciate it. So as they did that, we consequently saw that more and more people began joining the program, and that trend has continued. This very colored chart is showing you the individual participations where a single person has checked in at a typical activity. It's maybe visiting a gallery, it may be visiting an exhibition, it may be contributing to a poetic response, selecting works of art. Each stripe represents a different kind of activities. You may begin to notice trends in different stripes, different kinds of activities. And our staff is using this to hone their programming to identify which programs are relatively more or less effective than other programs in continuing to engage those audiences. We do offer rewards that are a la carte. So if you're a very active friend in the program, you can earn free tickets to our exhibition, free parking in our garage, catalogs from the store. By and large, all of the rewards we choose, and we attempt to connect them into future experiences with art and culture. So they are things that the audience wants, but it's a way to bring them back, again, to drive their repeat visit. This is a chart. Each dot represents one individual who has returned to the museum. What you may not be able to read from the audience is that the vertical axis of the graph goes to 200 visits. So the dots at the very top of the graph are people who have returned to the museum more than 100 times in a year. Every dot on this chart has returned more than once, and most have been back 5 to 10 times. So that's a really remarkable result for us, and we think that we can double or triple this in the immediate next year. we can graph where they're coming from in Dallas. So one of the things that we think is that if we're truly to be representative of the city of Dallas, then we ought to see friends from every area across the city, and we ought to see them in proportion to the population in that part of the city. So if there are neighborhoods for which we have very few friends, but they're very populated, then that's a problem, then we need to address that. So this is showing us just the raw distribution of friends geographically. You may imagine the Dallas Museum of Art is at the very center where the darkest green parts are. If I normalize this map by population density, then you start to see some interesting changes. Gray is in balance, where the number of friends in a gray zone is in balance with the population of that part of the city. Green areas are ones where we have relatively more friends, and the red areas are areas in which we have not done as well as we should be. So now our actual marketing efforts can be much more targeted in seeking out audiences from areas of the city where we're currently underrepresented. So just by way of a story, this young man is named Bobby Kaufman, and Bobby was one of our early, incredibly rapid adopters of the DMA Friends program. In fact, he was so rapid at his ascent up the ranks that we thought he was cheating, but we weren't going to accuse him of cheating. He in fact claimed a really great reward to invite a dozen of his friends to the museum to watch a movie in our theater of his choosing, which was great. But we interviewed him, and what we found out was pretty stunning. It turns out that Bobby had lived in Dallas, grown up there, but didn't usually come to the museum until we returned to free admission. He's a high school English teacher, and the museum is on his way home from school. And so rather than sitting in traffic, when the museum became free, he would park on the street and walk into the museum for 30 minutes to get his, quote, daily dose of art. He began to participate in DMA Friends because he liked the fact that he could earn benefits and bring it was about a girl. He could bring his girlfriend cheaply. But Bobby said that he had particular works of art in the European collection that he would study because he was also a poet and would use works of art to inspire poetry for himself and his students. So we felt very bad at that point that we were going to accuse him of cheating. But this is Bobby. This dot, I actually looked him up, the dot on this graph is Bobby, and the stripes are his pattern of behaviors, or the sorts of things that he would do on a daily basis. So not only do we know this about an abstract audience, but we can trace this down to individuals and begin to understand from an individual perspective, what is it that drives Bobby to be a passionate consumer of culture. So we have since gained funding from the U.S. Institute for Museum and Library Services to pilot this sort of program in 4 other cities, in Minneapolis, in Denver, in LA, and in a small museum in Abilene, Texas, where we will roll out the software and the platform in a way that's unique to each of those museums, but we'll aggregate the engagement data from all of those museums into a single repository where we can study it to do data mining to determine which techniques at each museum are being the most effective at driving that repeat consumer behavior for culture. So we think that this will be a really interesting way to move forward, and we think a lot about what it would mean to see that expand across the rest of the United States. So I think my time is up, but I really appreciate your attention this morning. If you're interested in the rest of the DMA Friends project, you could access the software that we use to create it at either of these 2 links. So thank you very much.